Welcome to the notly anticipated LangTime chat episode 66.
It's totally on time. It's all in your head that it's been a week.
You know, Jake actually said the sweetest thing about this, and I want to read it on there because it really touched my heart. Um, Jake says, I don't know how long the list of Conlang review show and tells participants is, but I would like to say that I have a particular fondness for the games. Oh, that's true. No, this is the second part. Also, that's just a note. They like the games.
Oh, I know.
Okay,
I took
cool.
note.
Also, sending healing energy to David to get the latest episode edited. We are all rooting for you. And there are two assumptions there. Number one was that the episode was done, which it was not. It's being recorded today, August 11th. Happy birthday to my friend from first grade, 1987, Dave Ortiz. And second, that these episodes are edited.
Listen, I read it differently, and I thought Jake was saying that you needed to finish editing the presentation,
Huh.
which I believe in a past episode you had made it sound like maybe it was further along than it was.
Oh, yeah.
And so I took that comment, while still very sweet, I took that comment to refer to the editing of what you're seeing on the screen, not which I believe everybody has noted in our Discord server at some point or another, the unedited podcast episodes that you get what you get, kind of like with our live streams, including any audio, as I'm trying to shout and I'm watching this bar bouncing and I'm hoping I'm loud enough, but they love us, David. And we're so grateful for Jake and their healing energy and just all of the love we get from all of you.
As Jesse has relayed to us, conlanging brings you a kind of personal energy. It's the very sounds themselves that imbue you with the energy that is held inside them and gives each word its own power.
You might say that in some languages, for every object, there's a word. Anyway.
There are a few people who will get this, there are others who won't, but if you don't, you just give us a shout. We'll send you a link. Anyway, but on to other media. This week we are talking about Kryptonian, specifically Suh Ankripton, the language that we created for Superman, which they made an executive decision at some point in 2024 to drop the subtitles from these films. So it's not Superman the blah blah blah. It's Superman, the exact same title as the first Superman, with Christopher Reeve. And that,
Listen, they were going for new and improved, no need for last names. You're going to know it when you know it.
yeah,
Done.
yeah, and we're going to come back to that because I think it's an important point. Because when we're talking about Kryptonian as a language, this is a bit different from something like, from Game of Thrones or something from The Witcher, because Kryptonian as a language is something that has been represented not just in the comic books, but in a number of different related media. And so we wanted to talk a little bit about some of them. These kind of go in eras. And the first that we want to talk about is the version of Kryptonian by E. Nelson Bridwell and Al Terniansky. So it started with Bridwell. And when I say that, I don't even know if that's exactly true. Because, obviously, Bridwell is not the person who created Superman. And the idea of Superman being from another planet is as old as, as the comics go. But from what we understand, it was Bridwell that first represented Kryptonian, known then as Kryptonese. Yeah. I'm so glad George R. R. Martin didn't call it Dothrakis or something. Dothrakis. Because they're the Dothrakis.
Wouldn't it have been Dothrakis?
Oh, Dothrakis. that's that's the verb for when you translate something into Dothraki. You Dothrakize it.
My fault.
Yeah. Anyway, there's Nelson Bridwell who first created the kind of scribblings that were called Kryptonese in the comic books, and Terniansky tried to kind of systematize it somewhat. Not that there was any rhyme or reason to the original ones, but it was mentioned in a fan letter. Somebody asked how many glyphs are there in Kryptonese, and Terniansky said there's 118, and so he actually made up 118 of them. But we actually have, and we're not going to share this on screen because I'm pretty sure this came, well, I know that this came to us directly from DC, and I don't think it's for sharing. But it was a book, well, it was a slideshow that was a history of the Kryptonian language as it was presented in the comic books and in every single series, and what might happen in the future. I think it was created. It was created either in conjunction with or shortly after Man of Steel, based on the way it was written. I think it was in between Man of Steel and Justice League, about how to represent Kryptonian in the future throughout all DC things. Anyway, and so they say point blank, and this is true, the original Kryptonese was absolute gibberish. Not in that it didn't represent a language. That of course is basically a given. But the scribbles themselves are not consistent from comic book to comic book. There's nothing at all. Nothing at all. And this talking about the original one. So it's funny. I remember I posted this on Tumblr. The little Kryptonian introduction, and one of the comments was, "This is good, but I prefer the original Kryptonese," which is telling me that basically you know absolutely nothing about anything at all and are simply doing this for style points.
David with the hot takes as usual.
So dumb. Anyway, so that's kind of where it started, and there's a picture here that shows you a little bit of it. It's really not worth looking into. And there might be a look for the Kryptonian alphabet that you're used to seeing if you've hunted around online. And you'll note that it doesn't actually bear any resemblance to what you see here. The one that you're probably thinking of is the Next Generation, which is attributed to John Byrne and George Brewer. George Brewer was the one that actually created the font. This is from like the 80s, and this is where they actually made a real cipher. Now, of course, we're conlangers, so you might be thinking, what are you talking about, a real cipher? Well, the previous, it was like gibberish syllables that weren't consistent within each other and then also didn't map to anything. A cipher, at least, the symbols are consistent, which they are from comic book to comic book and within itself, and each of them corresponds to a letter in the English alphabet. So that at least is a consistent cipher, which it's hard to say that a cipher is an upgrade, but this cipher was an upgrade. I mean, what could you do? At the very least, they had something. The cipher itself, the alphabet is terrible. Like just the type of stuff you just expect from sci-fi nonsense. But it was consistent, and it was used in the comic books for, not Superman's golden era, but I think an era that people are well familiar with. Anyway, so if you kind of separate the Kryptonian language into like a BCE and CE era, then the year zero for Kryptonian has to be Darren Doyle. Now, Darren Doyle was a fan, but basically he's the fan of Kryptonian. If I say that everybody in the world cares about Kryptonian, the language, at this time, 80s, 90s, or nobody in the world cares about Kryptonian, both are false, but the latter is closer to being true than the former. Almost nobody cared about the Kryptonian language at all, even fans of Superman. Darren Doyle did. Darren Doyle cared so much that he built this massive website that very carefully chronicled every single instance of the usage that he could find of every instance of Kryptonian. He found the names of all the people who did it. Site was very useful to us in doing research. And then he went on to create a fanlang using all as much of the original material as he could, as well as the George Brewer alphabet. Created his own fontified version of it, and created the first conlang, the first Kryptonian conlang. And I feel pretty confident in saying that. Everything before that was either gibberish, a cipher, or just a couple of words thrown together. Darren Doyle created the first conlang. Oh, I was turning to Jessie to say something, but she yawned.
I'm sorry. It's late.
It is late. And whose fault is that?
Mine.
No. It's mine. It's mine. It's all my fault. I'm so sorry. Anyway, a bit of kind of backstory here. For the Supergirl television show, they originally did the equivalent of virtual gibberish for the Martian language. And I know this, by the way, because one of the writers on Supergirl was a writer on a show that I worked on. I believe The 100, but if not, it was Defiance. I can't remember which. And so she just straight up told me that they just translated stuff into Icelandic specifically and then changed a syllable here and there using Google Translate, and that was their Martian language. Next thing that happened was Darren Doyle contacted me because they had been using his Kryptonian language once they had introduced Kryptonian to Supergirl. Of course, they weren't doing it right, and they probably didn't even realize that it was a fan creation when they started using it. But anyway, he made contact with them, then he contacted me, and essentially I helped him out so that he actually could get on the show and do real Kryptonian translations. And so then his conlang went from being a fanlang to being an actual version of Kryptonian that was in a real DC licensed show. And so that was something, positive that started out in a very negative way, if you ask me. Anyway, but that, of course, that was far after Darren had created the language. The next big thing was the Kryptonian that was created for Man of Steel. And that language was created by Christine Schreier. And then there was a writing system that was created by, this was an art department person, Kirsten Franson, with input from Christine, which is nice. Because, of course, anybody who's looked up the history of Atlantean, Mark Okren created Atlantean, and they had their art department create a writing system, and they brought him in to show it to him, and he's like, "Well, this isn't very good." In probably the way that Mark Okren does, which is very, very polite and very nice. He was more polite than I would have been. And then they were basically like, well, we're doing it anyway, which is what they did. So at the very least, Christine, had some input on the writing system, which was nice. But in true Hollywood fashion, after having created the entire language, they basically used none of it. So it's never spoken on screen. All of that was cut, even though there were these... what do you call it when it's something before the main action of a film?
Like a prequel, or do you mean
but not like a whole movie. A whole movie is a prequel, like a something back.
Oh, flashback.
Flashback. I was thinking of bend back. No, it's a flashback. It's a flashback. So yeah, there are flashback scenes in Man of Steel that take place on Krypton, and they're still speaking English. Like, they're not that long compared to the rest of the movie. They could have been in Kryptonian, but they're not. They're in English. And so the most that you see of it, you don't hear it. You can see in some of the art decoration in the background in these, not backbend, flashback scenes. Sorry.
I thought I was tired.
I know. You can see some of the writing on the walls. And so that's cool. not
Sorry.
super noticeable.
It's just, a common idiom in English. You see the writing on the
Right.
wall, and it's like, yeah, I think you do see the writing on the wall, as Hollywood
Yeah.
did not use the
And
language to its
yeah,
potential.
it's disappointing, but I have to say this kind of thing happens in movies, and I say movies quite specifically. Usually for TV shows that doesn't happen. If they have you do something, it'll show up. Um, in movies, I mean, I've been on a dozen of these, and like there are, it's rare when it's like, oh wow, they really used our stuff, you know. Um, Jesse now has experience with this too. And so it's not surprising. It was disappointing, but they really went all out. Both Christine and the art department when they put this together. And I wish that, like, I don't know if it's somewhere out on the internet. I wish we could share this presentation because this was essentially an internal pitch to DC to say, hey, we did this thing. We created this Kryptonian language. We created this writing system. This is how you can use it. And I think they did a really good job. And by the way, these aren't all the names, not even close. In fact, in that presentation, there's a totally different writing system and different cipher that was created by somebody named Sorensen that was used in a Superman cartoon that I'm unfamiliar with. It was later than the one that I know from the 90s. It was from the 2000s at some point in time. So you had another version of Kryptonian somewhere. So anyway, when we were approached about creating this language, first we were approached by DC without knowing what it was. We learned what it was when it was on a Zoom. And one of the first things I said was, well, there was a Kryptonian language that was created for Man of Steel. You could use the same thing. But essentially, they wanted to do something new. And when I say that, it is not because they looked at Christine's language and said, no, we don't like this. We want something different. And it wasn't because they didn't like Man of Steel or anything like that. Basically, they want what Marvel had 15 years ago. What arguably Marvel still has, but some might say, well, is everybody rushing out to see every new Marvel movie? They wanted a complete and total brand new, DC universe that's the equivalent of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, where everything is new and it's like, this is year zero and we're building our canon from scratch. And so, and not only that, they had an eye to future movies with this language specifically, so that was why they wanted to do something brand new. Anyway, so at that point, then we were kind of starting from nothing, and they gave us the online password to all the comic books that we could ever hope to see, and there are tons of them. And so then the question was, where did we start? And so I don't know if you wanted to talk a little bit about this.
Well, it's actually, first of all, hats off to Darren.
Yeah.
I suddenly forgot his last name. Boom, gone. It's a backbend, babe. I don't know. No flashbacks here.
The wild thing was in an interview recently, I forgot his first name.
Oh, these things happen. Anyway, hats off, because when you think about compiling all of the instances of the Kryptonian language, I feel like, or at least I did, not being familiar with the Superman comics in the sense that I hadn't read all of them. I thought Kryptonian would show up more. And it didn't. And so as it was actually my task to start the research process.
Yeah.
Well, David was working really a lot on sound samples and a few other things.
We'll talk about that in a minute.
Plus, we had some other projects going on. So I really took the lead on the research phase to try to find out what Kryptonian was there in the comics. And I found a lot of online resources, but many of them were not necessarily cited in the way that you could walk away saying, I'm pretty sure that actually was in the comics.
Mm-hmm.
And so, because of that, I just wanted to find, you know, through and through hard evidence in the comics. Here's the examples. Here's what Kryptonian, here's how it was used in sentences or whatever. It took a lot of digging, a lot of searching, and as David mentioned, Darren's website was hugely helpful. And I finally found someone who had cited the specific, like a specific comic where some Kryptonian shows up. And so thank goodness I did, because I had been literally leafing through, like page flipping, trying to find digital page flipping, trying to find examples of Kryptonian, failing miserably, eyes going crossed. And finally, I get this citation, and it's like in the back of the comics, not all of them, but in some of them, there was a special, like, flashback to Argo City. And so it was like a comic within a comic, because it was sort of like, okay, you finished reading the Superman comic that you got. Here's a bonus, like 5 pages that kind of takes you back and shows you something from the past.
If I can give an analogy, think about Saturday Night Live. Always a bunch of different sketches, but they always had the weekend update.
Mm-hmm.
This is kind of like that, and it was called The World of Krypton.
And so through that, I was able to then start pulling words and actually seeing them used, seeing how they were spelled, verifying some information I was finding online, verifying which sources were solid and giving me all the same information versus which sources were maybe not. And so that really helped, helped us build a sort of corpus, if you will, of Kryptonian words. And I don't know how much you want me to say about the words themselves, like what I was finding.
Well, we
or
will.
Do you have a?
We'll talk about it in a minute.
Okay.
But like, I chose these 2 images because it's a very nice example of how there was actually some very rudimentary conlanging happening in these comic books. It wasn't always consistent. But like, for example, it's got this, crime moliomo, one of the few major ills of society, which the science of this world has not been able to cure. Anyway, there's an asterisk next to moliomo, and there's a little footnote that in yellow that says that moliomo is plural of moliome, member of the Science Council. And then there's ENB, I'm not sure who that refers to in this case. But these kind of things you see throughout the world of Krypton, where it's like, oh, look at that. That's some actual morphology. And not only that, that's not the only place it shows up. In other words, this O suffix isn't like, oh, that's how you pluralize moliome and that's it. You see it elsewhere. You see the O suffix in lots of different places. And so it's like there were tiny little things like that we were able to find.
Yeah. And so between words like this that showed up, we character names, place names, and some other kind of really
Oddball
random
words.
oddball phrases and words. Really words, not phrases so much. We compiled a list as a starting point.
Yep. Also want to give a shout out to this website that doesn't have as much information as Darren Doyle's, but it was very useful. This was Superman Through the Ages. Darren, of course, did a lot of investigative work and then also created his own version of Kryptonian. This one is just like, here's the exact words that I can find that were in the comics. So this was super useful, and so I just wanted to mention that.
And I think this was the website. I can't see the small print, but I think this was also the website where they had very detailed maps, and the maps were like from the comics directly. And so the maps were really helpful because they showed the Krypton labeling of place names. And so, again, collecting place names. Like any instance that was supposed to be Krypton, like that, the Kryptonian language, that was really helpful.
Yeah. So anyway, this was where we started. Like we really went back to the comic books. We tried to find as much stuff as we could. Like there weren't, it was kind of, I think, a similar thing that we've done with other adapted works where it's like, especially with names, it's like, all right, this name doesn't have a meaning. There aren't a lot of words that have actual meanings here. But since we have all these names and we need roots for things, let's just use the names as roots as we need them, as it comes up. Anyway.
Well, and we also had good reason because in this there were specific mentions of like a name meaning something like a common phrase or a word. And so it wasn't just that we decided to assign personal names meanings as bits in the language, but like there was evidence that that was the intention when characters were originally named.
So, I'm sorry about that. You know what? This is our friends right now. My parents had an important text that I needed to respond to. But anyway, all right. So, anyway, let us professionally move on. This was kind of our inspiration. This was where we started. This was what we drew from. And so the first thing I want to talk about is stuff that we absolutely dumped because there was a lot. Sometimes, like with I mentioned this before, and I will keep mentioning it because I didn't realize at the time how grateful I needed to be. There was nothing from Dothraki or High Valyrian that I dumped. It all worked, and that was really, really, really wonderful. And almost everything else we've adapted, there's been stuff that we've had to dump. Some of it, and so this is just some of it, partly because it's just ridiculous. Like, the word for Kryptonian week is FAMF.
It's like Banff.
With two F's.
With an F.
With two F's on the end.
Doesn't Banff have two F's?
What?
Banff, the Canadian. Don't look at me like that.
Oh, is it a like a dish or something?
Place. Yeah. In Alberta, Canada.
Oh my God.
It's a destination.
Oh my God.
If you love nature, you go to Banff.
That's probably where they got it from. Oh, it's terrible. Anyway, again, the plural of it was Famfo with an just terrible. Anyway, that had to be dumped. Tanth is Sir or Tanth if you prefer. It's like, all right, whatever. Maybe we can deal with that NTH at the end of the word. Then you learn that the word for madam is tenth with a Y, maybe tinth, I don't know. And there's like this tiny mini little system that you can see in Kryptonian where A is switched out with Y to make the female version of it. So, or no, some vowel is switched out with Y for the female version of it. For example, Bethgar is a ruler and is king, and Bithgar with a Y is queen.
Mm-hmm.
Terrible. Like, just for shame. Anyway, then after this, going to even worse, Oliphant. It's a space elephant. I mean, that's not its definition. It's like, a Kryptonian beast that is very strong that also has tusks and a trunk. Anyway, it's spelled Oliphent, Oliphant, and it looks like an elephant, and it's from space. Terrible. Like, not even worth rescuing any bit of it. It was jettisoned into space whence it came. And then, like, Superman was born in the city of Kryptonopolis. First of all, I already hate Krypton as a name. I think it's terrible. It was supposedly based on crypt, but I mean there is an element krypton. Krypton gas.
Listen, there were major pharmaceutical vibes as I was putting this list together for us to start working. Because the number of Y's, X's, and Z's that showed up in places that you wouldn't necessarily expect. But I can't believe you didn't include Pryligoo, which is the
I
sea
was
monster.
thinking about it, because like
Um,
it sounds so much like they couldn't have known this, but it sounds so
yeah,
much like Prilosec.
yeah.
Yeah,
And then of course there was Lorax, which I was like, did they just straight up take that from Dr. Seuss? I don't even know.
that is actually an interesting question. So Dr. Seuss wrote the Lorax after World War II. That is an interesting question.
And so it
I
could
don't
have
know
been a
which came
nod.
first.
It could have
Yeah.
been a nod. But yeah, there were a lot of things where it was and it was not consistent, as David's pointing out. Like Kryptonopolis was supposed to be a native word after you see some of these other words that were going on, and you had everything from like, Molium and Hias and Grahu, and then suddenly there's like Twelian. And like you look at the list and it is
Bamf.
hard to find consistency. And some of that is because, as with a lot of comics with many, many comics inside them, there were different writers.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it wasn't, there was the same creator and, like the same big name behind a lot of these things, but it wasn't necessarily the same person doing the writing from every single comic.
In decades.
Yeah, decades and decades of this.
Yeah. Anyway, and then of course one of the biggest like snafus, I think, there's this panel from a Superman. It is established, not necessarily all at once, but in different places. That Kal-El, first of all, means star child. Kal means child. El means star. Which by the way, establishes a kind of modifier order that is noun modifier. This is pretty much canon. There are other places where they give like two words like that. There are a lot of names that are hyphenated, where it's very clear which part means which part. That helps to further cement this noun modifier order. Then you have this panel. I don't remember which comic this is from, but this is the birth of Superman. The surname El in ancient Kryptonese meant child, and Kal meant star. In other words, it's exactly backwards. That was a screw up. It's very, very, very clear that El is supposed to mean star, and Kal is supposed to mean child. So obviously, it's in a comic, but it had to be dumped. It's inconsistent with other stuff in the comic. You got to choose one. We chose the better one and the more obvious one and the more prevalent one. Anyway, so now for actual phonological inspirations when it came to doing it. Here's just an example of some of the words. These are all from the comics. We have Grahu, which is Kryptonian plastic.
And don't forget that from Grahu, you get Grahu Hut,
Oh yeah,
which
the
is a
Grahu
shelter
hut.
made.
Surprised they didn't do the Gra hut. Anyway, Droth, a kind of seabird. Krypton, of course. Shyla, there are a lot of instances. There are instances where Y is supposed to be an I, and instances where Y is supposed to be an I. Like, I don't think that's supposed to be Shilla. I also don't think it's supposed to be Sheila. I think it's supposed to be Shyla.
Well, also Y is a ya, like in Yaga.
True, yeah, yep. Bethgar, ruler, Lorax, Kryptonian month. Rao, the Kryptonian sun god. Names like Vasquor and the Wolu. What was Wolu again?
Oh, Wolu.
Famous Wolu. Keep thinking
we
it's...
ended up taking it off the list, I think,
Oh,
because
yeah.
we figured out how to integrate it, I think.
Oh, it's in the blue chart.
It's in the blue?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
Well, I feel like maybe I should just search for it.
No, you should just search for it because it's not on the blue chart. My bad.
Here we go. Hour.
Oh, right. Hour. There's a whole thing about Kryptonian seconds and hours and all that. Anyway, so...
I told David he couldn't get rid of that.
Yeah. This is a very W forward list, and so we leaned into that this time. Anyway, so we kind of took these ideas, and I had a very, very clear vision for what I thought the sound of it should be. which I did. And so this
Mandoralan
was the first
Kashturadal.
sound sample I said.
Beshalarana
Mandoralan
Stobu
Kashturadal.
En
Beshalarana
Quelhalashinu
Stobu
ad
Izei.
Lex.
En Quelhalashinu ad Formailex.
Wayasamba.
Wortama
Erutovana,
Sevalul. Wayasamba. Erutovana, Quelubatal.
Okay, before you go on, what's really funny is David was playing these sound samples earlier today, and I obviously recognized his voice, but I was like, what language is this? Like, I don't remember working on this. Now I remember this was...
Uh-huh.
So anyway,
So, I don't know.
spoiler alert.
So Jesse, this is the first sound sample I set. What did director James Gunn say about this sound sample?
I feel like the response to this one was, it sounds like Dothraki.
And you would be correct. It was like, well, we wanted a little bit of a different sound for this. Sounds kind of like Dothraki, which, you know, I had to bow to James Gunn's wisdom. After all, he is the world's leading expert in Dothraki.
Listen, be nice. James Gunn is from St. Louis, and he made a really good Superman film.
He sure did. He sure did. And so anyway, this part, which is usually a short part of the language creation process, lasted quite a while. So that was the first sound sample. Call that A. Then we have sound samples B through H. We're not going to go through all of them.
Nisbet Daraklan Fininski Nustilin Penedemrath.
Nisbet Daraklan Fininski Nustilin Penedemrath. Alanan ben Heterikelish Vanakashtalan Parastaklar. Julunozokiri Denis Magdare Hakwaz Holodomur.
Yeah, I like, because like this was all responding to feedback. They're like, okay, we don't like this and this and this. So it's like, all right, change it in some
Nisbet
way.
Daraklan
And then I do
Fininski
that.
Nustilin Penedemrath.
Nisbet Daraklan Fininski Nustilin Penedemrath. Alanan ben Heterikelish Vanakashtalan.
What's happening, David?
What's happening is I built this stupid thing wrong, and I'm sorry. Here, wait. Builds remaining.
Nisbet Daraklan Fininski Nustilin Penedemrath.
Nisbet Daraklan Fininski Nustilin Penedemrath. Alanan ben Heterikelish Vanakashtalan Parastaklar. Julunozokiri Denis Magdare Hakwaz Holodomur.
Nisbet Daraklan Fininski Nustilin Penedemrath.
Nisbet Daraklan
Alanan ben
Fininski
Heterikelish
Nustilin
Vanakashtalan
Penedemrath. Alanan
Parastaklar.
ben Heterikelish
Julunozokiri Denis
Vanakashtalan
Magdare
Parastaklar.
Hakwaz Holodomur.
Julunozokiri Denis Magdare Hakwaz
So-
Holodomur.
What David really did was submit the same sound sample 8 times.
Oh
Now
my
I know
God.
why. No, just kidding.
This is ridiculous. I can't. So I built it wrong. And I don't think that I can change it without going through. Anyway, you know what? You don't get to hear the other words, but let's just suffice it to say there was one where there were no vowels. It was just all like, you know, it was all clicks, ejectives, like fricatives, stops, you know,
I think
nuclei.
if you were really paying attention to that
There
second
was
time,
one.
it sounded like David was doing his own percussion
Yeah, yeah.
behind the sound sample. That was one of the sound samples.
Yeah.
Because what we get from a lot of, like, as we start going through new projects, especially when it's supposed to represent a language that is off planet, one of the instincts is to say we want it to sound really alien.
Mm-hmm.
And so when we give them something really alien, though, they suddenly go, oh no, we need it to sound a little bit more human. And so that happens, which I totally get, because if you've never played with language in that way, I think it's really hard to conceptualize if you take something that is so alien sounding and put it together in, you know, a consistent way in a language form. The result is something that is so alien that it could actually alienate your viewers and no longer make connections with these characters who are supposed to be getting very real human connections. And I think, and that's exactly what happened when it was like, when they heard, when it wasn't just James Gunn, it was a team.
Yeah.
There was a team of people. So I know David's doing his thing here, but there was a team that was responding to it.
I think he stopped listening after the first one.
And when they heard the really alien example, they were like, no,
was like,
let's go back to this other one.
I sent them that to prove a point, and I was like, well, at least there's a floor on this thing. Anyway, there's 2 builds remaining on this. It's obviously going to play the same thing again. I'll try to click through really quickly so you
No,
can.
if you click through too fast, that one thing happens.
No,
Még
now
bedarakwan
you'll
gunum
hear it all.
kirjunos tolok tenet
Még bedarakwan gunum kirjunos tolok tenet zembras.
Oh my God, it
Alienak
actually
sud
did it.
hetiri weldes banakhatsulu parias tuquaz. Juludozok ired zinit banyal jaquaz holundumus.
All right. Anyway, that last one was actually the one that
That got it,
that they
yes.
liked. So whatever. Kryptonian. Here's
David.
I know.
David.
Look, I thought I was like, well, I can just have put them on the same one rather than making new slides.
Never
That was
do
wrong
that.
of me.
Yeah,
It was wrong of me. Never will I do that again. Very, very, very sorry. All right. So anyway, we got this phonology here. I'm just gonna like speak it. I mean, it's pretty vanilla. I mean, it's got your usual stops plus cha-ja, sha-ja, usual fricatives. It's got th but not the, because they didn't like the. I included it in the first one. It's also not there's no the represented in any of the comics, so I was like, all right, whatever, but there's clearly a th. We've got just a tap, ra, la, ya, wa, mana. And then there are labialized velars, quagwa, and also a labialized glottal, hua, which I forgot to talk about in this, but it's a reflex of all of the H's are reflexes of older velar fricatives. There was cha, ra, hua, and hua at the proto stage, and they all ended up as either ha or hua. Anyway, so that's the consonants. Vowels, a, e, I, o, u, not messing around there, not giving any credence to the Y vowel, turning into either I or I, no. We will allow the diphthongs, but the diphthongs are sequences of vowel followed by glide. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Anyway, so we wanted to talk a little bit about some of the sound changes and what inspired them. So first, I will draw your attention to some of these. These are comic book words. So grahu, droth, and krypton. These inspired a very specific idea we had that I really, really like. This is one of my favorite things about the entire language. So we posited, even though there is only a single tap in this language, in the modern stage, we posited 3 proto-Rs. The tap, ra, the uvular trill, r, and then a voiceless uvular trill, ha, ha, ha. Yep. All of these are phonemes at this proto stage. And what this bought us is doing something a little bit interesting. So there is some monkeyed about here where there was a medial stage where there were uvular stops. Suffices to say all the uvular stops became velar stops, so ignore that. But there were sequences, there are plenty of sequences in the language where a liquid follows a nasal. Anytime a liquid follows a nasal, we have a sound change where an epenthetic stop is inserted. This includes L, even though I didn't put L on here. But so nra, for example, N followed by nra, gets an epenthetic D, and so it becomes ndra. The uvular ones, though, had uvular stops inserted, which then became velar stops, and so nra becomes ngra, and nkha becomes nkha. Then all the R's just dead end in the tap. And so suddenly these older sequences become ndra, ngra, and nkra. All right? So that's sound change 1. Mm-hmm. Sound change 2 is this also happened with certain fricative liquid sequences. So for example, sra becomes, first there's voicing assimilation. So sra becomes zra, becomes zdra, and that's where it stays in the modern. Sra becomes zra, becomes zgra, and sra becomes skra. Oops, that's supposed to be voiceless. Sorry. And that becomes skra. All right? So if you think through this and, project a little bit and think about paradigms, you might see where we can have some fun with this, and you'll see that a little bit later. So, another sound change, we have the Bethgar, the male ruler. As you can tell with the masculine it's not,
It's not that feminine e.
No, that's too weak for a masculine ruler. Anyway, so yeah, obviously we had this th in there that we were going to have to include at some point because it's everywhere. So we posited that these were actually older sounds. There was th and the. Both of these changed after nasals, and so th becomes nda, and the becomes nda. Incidentally, those who were fans of tonth and tinth, sorry. Elsewhere, the th remained as a phoneme, but the became z everywhere. And so again, here you might see another place where there's potential to have some fun. Finally, we have these X's everywhere.
Yeah.
Lorax. And I think, was it you who came up with this sound change?
I don't remember. I'm sorry.
Okay.
But I'll say it was. Yeah. It was me.
Jesse had this idea. I think I had the first part of this, and it came second. But I think it was Jesse who thought, what if there was earlier t and z, and they became x and gz? And I said, because, we never see that at the beginning of a word. I was like, well, what I think maybe that was what, I had this vague memory of you saying like, well, I think this is a good idea, but we can't have words starting with x and gz. And I said, well, why don't they just simplify to s and z, which is essentially what we English speakers do with like Greek words. And so that is what we did. And so we have these proto-affricates that are gone in this stage, represented by x and gz everywhere except word initially, where they are s and z. And so then in the modern era, you have these 6 different phonemes that surface as either th, s, or z in at least one environment, right? And so again, when you talk about creating like a proto-language to introduce paradigmatic irregularities, this is it. And honestly, this is, I think, the most interesting part of our language.
Not only the irregularities, but you can start to imagine the flavor of the language without knowing any of the words yet. You're going to know like which sounds just occur more frequently than others. And this was very purposeful to match the kinds of words and the amount of fricatives that were used in the Kryptonian in the comics to give that throwback to what was there.
Yeah. Okay, so next, I know this is a podcast, so you're just gonna have to rely on me describing it. We were actually given leave to create an orthography for our Kryptonian language. And if you look throughout the past of Superman, there has not been inspiring work done orthographically. The orthography that was done for Man of Steel has a very cool, like, artistic look to it. That said, not a great orthography in the sense of, can you imagine somebody actually writing or using this? There's... Some of it is overcomplicated in that where it's like if somebody was actually writing this by hand, this would never survive. And second, there is the usage of, and I understand why it was done, but the usage specifically of flipping the characters or like rotating them like 90 degrees in various points to indicate different vowels. I don't think this is a good idea. Period. It's perish. I dread dyslexics trying to use something like that. Anyway, having said that, I then basically continued in the tradition and created something that I don't like.
You know, it's really funny. It's when you see it in the ways that it gets represented on like in different ways that it could be done in art pieces and things like that. I just think that this particular font build was not a good end point.
Yeah.
Because when you see these same characters represented in other ways, it's actually quite exciting.
Yeah.
And it's like, oh, that's amazing. Or when you do like, because we've done quite a bit of handwriting.
Yeah, honestly, it looks great.
Just to take notes. And yeah, handwriting, it looks great. It's just, I feel like we had just come off one of the LangTime fonts, and it was just sort of like those shapes were in our head. Like Sarkozy or something. I don't know. But ignore the font, look at the shapes. They work. Play with it with handwriting.
Yeah.
It's much better.
This is what I will say. I have tried twice in my life to emulate an Art Deco style in a font. That is what I was aiming for. I was thinking of, like, the spotlights you see when, they're throwing up the bat signal. I was thinking about the art style that you'd see in that 90s Batman the Animated Series, which itself was inspired by, I think actually an old Superman one that was done in black and white in like the 40s. This was what I was trying to evoke. I was trying to evoke that architectural style. I tried this twice, and I think both writing systems are just monumental failures. Nobody will probably ever see the other one. It was for a video game that never made it. I can't even remember if I've showed you this one, but it was that video game, remember, where the guy for that other,
Gotcha.
for the other video game that we almost worked on until it too was scrapped.
Yeah.
Ugh. Anyway, but yeah, I should take another crack at this. I should try to make another like font face for this. I think I should.
It's not the orthography that's problematic.
Yeah,
it's really just the font face.
They don't flow together. Like they don't fit together. And some
words look great together.
Some of them do.
Others, like I'm seeing one that's coming up where it's like, that looks great together. And then others, it's like, no, there's something that needs to be worked out.
Yeah, there were, I think that especially LangTime Studio followers will remember that there were a couple of tweaks I made to specifically Sarkozy's font and Haugoff's font because there was a weight issue where certain lines for certain glyphs were thicker than like the rest of the entire system. And because of that, it made it look inconsistent. It felt like things were off. And I think this font suffers from that as well. Anyway, but the writing system, it's an Abugida. It's my favorite, The A is the assumed glyph. So the A column either stands for that syllable or just the consonant itself. And then there is one diacritic for front vowels. It goes below. It's like a little half circle. And if it's got a dot below that, it's high. So, the half circle below for and the half circle with a dot for E. And then the back vowels have another kind of half circle, but above it. And then there's a dot that's associated with U. So it's somewhat, systematic in that regard. Some of these look good. I love Lee. I think that's my favorite. One of my favorites from the entire system is the glyph Lee. That was one of the first glyphs I designed for this, and that really kind of showcases what I was thinking. Think about the floodlights from the ground. That's what that was, and I think it looks great. The rest just didn't hold up. Anyway, but I introduced this because it helps to showcase, I think, one of the coolest things about this language. So we have these 3 R's, right? So here are 3 words: Rao, sun, Rahu, plastic, and Riton, Krypton. All of these are ones that came from the comic books. Obviously, you might hear Riton and think that's Krypton. How? Well, it's because basically, these were all different R's. Each of these ones came from a different proto-R. Sun came from the tap. The Rahu came from the voiced uvular. And Riton came from the voiceless uvular R. And that spelling is actually reflected in the writing system. When a word begins with R, it begins with either a silent D, a silent G, or a silent K that reflects the original R. And you might think, why is that useful? Why would they still be doing that? And in order to demonstrate that, we need to go on to the morphology. So, basic morphology. This isn't all the cases. I think there's 8. And there's some cool stuff at the end, but I'm just pulling these up for phonological reasons. So we have kal, which means child, and then, nominative singular, kal, plural, kalo, and that's that O suffix, remember, that we saw from the comic books. But we created some other plural suffixes that fit together with different cases. So accusative, ikal, there's kind of a functional prefix that's going on. The plural is ikalas. Locative, uskal, plural, uskalyat. Ablative, ankal, and plural, ankalas. Those who remember the sound changes that we've seen thus far might be able to predict what's coming. But as you can see, essentially the functional part of the case is a prefix. The plural part is a suffix. It's a bit segmentable, at least with this word. But there are very specific plural suffixes associated with the different cases. And O, by the way, is always nominative plural, which is why anytime you see a plural in the comics, of course, they wouldn't have been thinking about other cases. Now, taking a look at words that came from these different proto-Rs, all right? Here we have Rahu, and Rox. Rox is a word for wing, and that came from the voiceless uvular, all right? The nominative and accusatives, whatever, Rao, Irao, Rahu, Irahu, Rox, Irox. But then the locative that has the us prefix, we have uzdrau, voicing and the inserted D, uzgrahu for that one, uskrox for the other. And this is essentially what writing the silent D, G, and K buys you. Suddenly, this is predictable in the orthography. Same with the ablative, where you have andrau, angrahu, and ankrox. So, I think that was really cool.
I agree.
Hooray! And now we get to the verbs David doesn't want to discuss. I was so lazy, I just pasted the tables in.
I see that. Yeah, we did like a lot of really cool things with
There's a lot of stuff.
Verbal and nominal morphology. Like there are a
Nominal
lot of
yeah.
really cool things.
There's
However,
there's like overlap in the participles in the cases. But anyway, this is the non-finite stuff. However, the finite stuff,
what David is not saying and that you're not seeing on your podcast screen,
right, I guess I should say,
is that
they're so
they were big. There were forms that are fine, and then suddenly you put them into larger forms and it starts to become difficult to pronounce. And so this language became more difficult than I think we had hoped in terms of getting out some of the words. Go ahead, David.
Yeah, and I'll just mention for those, obviously everybody has only seen Superman at this point. And you'll know that there's comparatively not very much Kryptonian in Superman. Let's just say that more is coming. And I had to record all this stuff twice, in fact, because of the extra. We'll talk.
Hey, I had to record too.
And so did Jesse. Oh my God, that's right. Forgot about that. But like, just to give you an example, so vanegrium is third person negative. This is fly. So that's like, this she isn't flying. This is the imperfect. This whole thing is the imperfect. So vanegrium is she isn't crying. Passive, vanogrium, pretend that actually makes sense. That would be like, she or they are not flown, like an airplane or something like that. Let's pretend that it's ambitransitive. But that means that the difference between the passive negative and the third person singular negative is a vowel in non-tonic position in a very long word. So vanegrium versus vanogrium, that's terrible. And then like the rest of these, like vanirium versus vanerium, that's first versus second person. Vanorium is first person plural. Vanvorium is third person plural, second person plural. They're so big.
They are big, but
oh god,
they're also, one, they're big because they're packing a lot of information on them. Two, I get what you're saying about the vowels in these kind of, they're not in the stressed position, but at the same time, like, that happens all the time in languages. There are things where I'm like, what are the French thinking with these vowels? And like, these vowels are so delicately shifted, and suddenly it's like, it's no longer singular, it's plural. Suddenly it's like no longer this, it's that. And it totally shifts everything just by changing one of the vowels that you can barely hear, because in the overall sentence structure it's not a stressed word. And yet for them, like, that's the only thing that holds the phonetic cue to how the noun is supposed to be interpreted, because all the nouns are pronounced the same because all their endings have been leveled.
So it's funny that you mentioned French, because I was thinking of French with this in this regard. I was like, this needs another set of lenition. This needs to be French, where like there is no prodrop anymore, because most of these forms have collapsed and sound the same. That's what this needs. This needs another set of sound changes to be good.
Well, it would have if Krypton weren't destroyed before they finished the sound changes
That's
on
right.
the planet.
Their linguists were working hard at it, and they were about to present them to the council, to the Moliomo.
And boom. So, no, there are definitely forms that are difficult, but also they are forms that if you grew up speaking this language, you would just do it, in the same way that there are forms in Hungarian that I'm like, I will never be able to say this word without tripping over it.
The
and yet
postpositions
there
are
they
fake.
are.
So here's my biggest issue. If you look at something like Spanish, right? Spanish has a lot of different verb forms, and there are forms that are very, very, very close to being the same. So like, hablo is I speak, hablo is he spoke, right? Same exact, only difference in stress is stress, and also routinely things like hablo, habla, hable, and this is like including the subjunctive, right? However, if you look at verbs like this, usually the place where there is the distinction, where however slight, is at the beginning of a word, the end of a word, or on a stressed syllable. These things are routinely distinguished, not at the beginning, not at the end, and not on a stressed syllable. That's the thing that kills me. Really disappointing. And like, in terms of like who did what on this language, these verbs are mine. And like the things where I look at it and I'm like, you know what, there's more me of this than Jesse in this. It's like the verbs in the orthography. And it's like, good Lord. I'm so sorry. Anyway, this is just the imperfect. Like, it gets worse. So I think the perfect is actually my favorite. It's still, you can hear the same thing. So like vanigath, vanegath, vanogath, vanmogath. It's consistently this non-stressed, non-initial, non-final syllable.
A little spider in front of your screen.
Oh, can you get him? right there.
Of
All right. Yeah. All right. So, anyway, oh wow, there's also like Vanogoth versus Vanokath. That's actually kind of cool. Now we have a voicing distinction. That's Vanogoth is first person plural. And Vanokath is passive, and that's singular plural. Passive doesn't distinguish, doesn't agree. Anyway, and I know why all this is. There's clever stuff, and you know what? I was aiming for this. I thought it was going to be so clever because it's like, this is where the pronouns would have fallen when the structure evolved, right? And then I was like, oh, and then where they're going to distinguish tense, it's going to come at the end. I was actually trying to do this.
And you did it.
However, it should have... stress should have been different if I wanted to do this. Because this just doesn't make any sense. There are some cool sounding... Like, I actually like the negatives in these. You know, Vanigahum versus Vanokahum. I think that's cool. The future is really where things get off the rails.
Really? Listen. Voyage. Wonderful. Voyage. Bon voyage. Bon voyage. Listen to that.
Bon voyage, everybody.
Vanya shucks. Come on. This is good stuff.
Vanya shucks. Van Moya shucks. Oh my gosh. And the thing is, like, these
There's
forms
so
show up.
much
These forms show up.
information.
And so bad. It doesn't... It's not enough information to warrant the length. It takes up so much space when you're actually translating stuff. And like, I've actually gotten pretty good at pronouncing these because I've done it so much. Oh my God. Oh man. It's... Just wait. You'll see what's coming. Anyway. So yeah. Part one of things to come. But this is a little soft introduction. We could have done more, but then we are already over time. So
We are,
Yep.
indeed.
So, final thoughts?
Well, I feel David has put this presentation together on a day where he's feeling some doom and gloom. And like, I appreciate that he has some critical feedback for pieces of the language, but like, I have critical feedback for a lot of natural languages if we're going to get into this. Like, listen, this happens. But also, when it came together and when it is spoken, it is unique, it is different, it's what they were going for. It became its own little beast that gives a nod to a very rich history of comic books.
It's all in there, everything.
Like, it is really cool, and I'm really proud of the work that we did. And again, as much as David has his moments, I'm glad that James Gunn and his team came back the way they did. Not necessarily by saying it was similar to Dothraki, because I did not hear it either, but in the sense that at the end of the day, it became the sound that is just, I will forever associate with this, this franchise. And like, I am really, really happy with that. Not to say that I'm glad they didn't go for that one sound sample that was so glad that sound sample was out of it. But there were many other sound samples we could have gone with, but I always, it's hard when you're in the moment of having to go back and forth and being like, what do you want? But at the same time, that's how much they cared. And they really did care that they found the sound they wanted for this film. And I feel like they must have gotten what they had hoped for because they used it. And I'm so happy with it.
My favorite thing about this language is actually the rhythm and accent.
Oh, yeah.
It's like it's it's tougher, and it's hard for me to explain this, but when you're pronouncing a language that you don't know well, in order to be able to actually do it, to actually get through it, you have to retain the meaning of it as you are saying it. You have to be able to remember it. Like, obviously, it's best if you don't have to think about it at all. Like, you just know what you're saying. It's like I do right now with English. But if you're pronouncing something else, like, for example, like Russian is a great example. It could have some really long words. Um, you have to remember what it is, what exactly it is that it means, and ideally how it means what it means, if you need to break it down like that. But it's what makes a really long, difficult to pronounce word easy to pronounce, because you know what it means, you know what it sounds like, and you can do it. The problem with that I was having with pronouncing Krypton is that I would lose it with the verbs. They were too long, and so I would start to lose it, and then I'd have to like come back and try to remember it. If they were a little bit shorter, it would have been perfect, because I think that I think that the sound of it and the accent was so unbelievably consistent and clear and unique that, just like Jesse said, it does have a really wonderful sound. I love it. I think it sounds great, and um, and it's cool because it's like, it's funny. We had to do this thing with another project we're working on right now, where we were going through how to do an accent in English, like if we were to speak with English with that type of accent. And I actually went through and tried to like look at the phonology and write down some rules, and I have to think about it a little bit in order to get it right. Like, it's possible, you can do it, but I had to think about it. I don't have to do that with Krypton because it has such a very strong and clear accent that I don't even need to think about it. I could just do it if I wanted to. It's very nice, and I think it sounds really good. It's so weird. It feels to me like it's what modern Greek might sound like, except I don't really know what modern Greek sounds like. I just feel like in some other world, like it could have been modern Greek.
This could have been.
Yeah.
If only Argo City had made it.
Yeah. Anyway, so yeah, I really do like it. I love to hear the sound of it. I love to hear it pronounced well. And I like listening to the recordings of even myself doing it. It's tougher to pronounce than it is to listen to. Anyway, yeah. So yeah, that was it for now. And it's funny, there's not a lot of stuff to like pour through at the moment. There's just that one speech. This time next year, I think,
Hope so.
be a lot more. Anyway,
Well, hopefully you all enjoyed this. Thank you for listening, and we look forward to talking to you next time on LangTime Chat.
bye everybody.